What if the biggest party on Earth, the 2026 FIFA World Cup right here in America, is already on a collision course with a global political earthquake? We're not talking about ticket prices or stadium upgrades today. We're talking about something way bigger, way heavier, and way more real than any pundit or soccer mom is ready for. Forget the pitch, forget the goals, forget the glitter. Picture this. It's 2026. The world's eyes are on North America. Millions of fans, thousands of players, billions of dollars, all converging for the greatest show on turf. Sounds amazing, right? A true global celebration. But what if, just below the surface, an invisible hand, a political hand, is already pulling strings, setting traps, and drawing red lines that could turn this dream into a full-blown international headache? What if the very fabric of global cooperation, the kind you need to pull off an event this massive, is already fraying, torn apart by rhetoric and policies crafted thousands of miles away, long before the first whistle blows? I'm talking about the specter of a potential second Trump presidency. Look, love him or hate him, there's no denying that when Donald Trump was in the White House, the world felt it. His foreign policy wasn't just a ripple, it was a tidal wave. And whether you're a die-hard fan or you couldn't care less about soccer, if you live in America, if you care about the economy, if you care about how the world sees us, then you need to buckle up. Because that tidal wave? It's heading straight for USA 2026. This isn't speculation. This is a reckoning with reality. They say politics and sports don't mix. My friend, they've always been in the same stew, and right now, that stew is about to boil over. We won the World Cup bid on a promise of unity and stability. But what if that promise is already unraveling, not from within, but from the very top of American leadership, before a single ball is even kicked? Let's rewind a bit. Cast your mind back to 2018. The world watched as the FIFA Congress gathered in Moscow, a city already steeped in its own geopolitical complexities. This wasn't just about who had the best stadiums or the prettiest cities. This was a high-stakes diplomatic chess match. The contenders? A solo bid from Morocco, a nation with a rich footballing history, and the audacious, united bid from the US, Canada, and Mexico. The narrative from the North American trio was powerful. We are united. We offer stability. We offer unparalleled infrastructure. We offer a secure, financially lucrative, and welcoming environment for the world. This wasn't just talk. The three nations, historically neighbors, but often sparring partners, put on a united front. Think about it. A joint bid spanning three countries, each with its own distinct culture, all coming together for one common goal. That's a diplomatic feat in itself. The pitch was all about collaboration, about bridging divides, about a shared vision for the future of global football. They promised a World Cup that would generate billions in economic activity, break attendance records, and leave a lasting legacy of sports diplomacy. They promised a warm embrace for every nation, every fan, every player. It was a narrative of harmony, a counterpoint to the corruption scandals that had plagued FIFA in the past. The world was looking for reliability, for a safe pair of hands, and the united bid presented exactly that. And it worked. The United 2026 bid won decisively, securing 134 votes to Morocco's 65. Cheers erupted. Flags waved. The dream of bringing the World Cup back to North America for the first time since 1994 was real. It was seen as a testament to diplomacy, cooperation, and the power of shared ambition. We were going to host a global party, and everyone was invited. The message was clear. North America, specifically the United States as the lead host, was a bastion of predictability and openness. A safe harbor in an increasingly turbulent world. But here's the kicker, the part nobody was really talking about on that celebratory day. Donald Trump was already in the White House when that bid was awarded. And his America First foreign policy wasn't a secret. It was the driving force behind his administration. While the United bid was selling unity and global engagement, the White House was, at times, doing the exact opposite. Remember the trade wars with Canada and Mexico? The constant renegotiation of NAFTA, the threats of tariffs, the heated rhetoric? While our bid committee was selling unity with our neighbors, the political reality was often quite different. There were moments when relations with Ottawa and Mexico City were strained to a breaking point. These weren't minor squabbles. These were fundamental disagreements about economic policy and national sovereignty. For FIFA, an organization that thrives on its member nations playing nice, this was already a simmering tension. They were relying on 3 nations to put on a seamless event, but 2 of those nations were constantly at odds with the primary host. Beyond our immediate neighbors, the Trump administration was also challenging long-standing alliances, withdrawing from international agreements, and often taking an adversarial stance on the global stage. This created an atmosphere of uncertainty, of unpredictability. FIFA, as a global organization, needs stability. It needs governments that are consistent, that respect international norms, that don't suddenly change their minds on critical issues like travel, trade, or diplomatic relations. The United bid presented a picture of a welcoming, open, and globally minded America. But the America First doctrine was, in many ways, an antithesis to that. It signaled a potential shift towards isolationism, protectionism, and a unilateral approach to international affairs. This wasn't just about optics. It was about fundamental trust. Could the world truly count on the U.S. to be the welcoming host it promised to be, when its political leadership often seemed to be drawing borders, not dissolving them? The promise of 2026 was a global fiesta. The precedent being set by the White House was a much more guarded, insular vision of America. The stage was set for a conflict between these 2 opposing forces. The real question isn't whether this tension existed, but how it could actively sabotage the meticulously planned future of USA 2026. Because if the world doesn't trust the host, the party's already over before it begins. America First fundamentally shifted how the world viewed the U.S. But why should FIFA care about trade tariffs and climate agreements when all they want to do is play ball? Let's get real about America First. This wasn't just a catchy slogan. It was the bedrock of Donald Trump's foreign policy, and it sent shockwaves through every corner of the globe. From the moment he took office, the message was clear. U.S. interests would always come first, even if it meant ruffling feathers, challenging allies, or dismantling decades-old international agreements. Think back to the Paris Climate Accord, a global pact, painstakingly negotiated, designed to tackle one of humanity's biggest collective threats. Trump pulled the U.S. out. Then came the Iran nuclear deal, another multilateral agreement aimed at preventing nuclear proliferation. Gone. He slapped tariffs on goods from allies like Canada and the European Union, igniting trade wars that hurt American businesses and consumers just as much as foreign ones. He openly questioned the value of NATO, a cornerstone of Western security for over 70 years, calling it obsolete and demanding more from member states. The rhetoric was often confrontational, designed to project strength, but often interpreted as aggressive or isolationist by other nations. There was a consistent theme. America would act unilaterally when it deemed necessary, and traditional diplomacy, multilateralism, and global consensus often took a back seat. This wasn't just abstract politics, it had tangible consequences. It strained relationships with countries that are usually our closest allies: Germany, France, the UK, Japan, South Korea, Canada, Mexico. These are not minor players on the global stage, and crucially, they are also major footballing nations with significant influence within FIFA. For many world leaders, Trump's approach was a stark departure from the predictable, alliance-driven foreign policy they had come to expect from the U.S. The message wasn't about partnership, it was about primacy. It wasn't about shared values, it was about transactional deals, often driven by a zero-sum mentality. Allies felt alienated. Adversaries often felt emboldened. The global order, as many knew it, felt like it was teetering. So why does any of this matter for a soccer tournament? Because FIFA, at its core, is a globalist organization. It relies on the free movement of people, goods, and capital across borders. It thrives on international goodwill, cooperation, and a shared understanding of rules and norms. A World Cup isn't just a sporting event. It's a massive logistical operation that requires seamless coordination between dozens of governments, immigration agencies, customs officials, and security forces. When America First translates into America Alone or America Against, it creates friction at every single one of those critical junctures. If the U.S. is seen as an unreliable partner, or worse, an openly hostile one, it filters down. Diplomats might be less willing to go the extra mile. Bureaucrats might be less inclined to expedite requests. Nations might view collaborations with suspicion. Consider this. FIFA needs assurances that players from every qualifying nation can enter the host country without undue burden. They need guarantees that fans, sponsors, and media can travel freely. They need cooperation on security intelligence, on intellectual property rights, on currency exchange, on everything from catering to broadcasting. These are not minor details. They are the gears that make a World Cup machine run. When the leading host nation is actively challenging its allies, imposing tariffs, and withdrawing from international norms, it casts a long, dark shadow over these critical operational needs. How do you guarantee free movement for players from nations subject to travel bans or heightened scrutiny? How do you ensure customs efficiency when trade relations are tense? How do you foster a spirit of global celebration when the host country's rhetoric is often seen as exclusionary? The perception of the U.S. on the global stage directly impacts FIFA's confidence in its ability to deliver on the promises of the united bid. If the U.S. is seen as a unilateral actor rather than a collaborative partner, it undermines the very foundation of what FIFA strives to be, a unifying global force. The America First doctrine, by its very nature, clashed with FIFA's globalist mandate, turning what should be a smooth diplomatic process into a potential minefield. The implications aren't just diplomatic, they're intensely practical. And they lead us to a terrifying question. What happens when FIFA, a truly global body, finds itself caught between its mission and the unpredictable whims of its most powerful host? FIFA isn't just a sports organization, it's a global political entity. What happens when its biggest host nation becomes a geopolitical earthquake, shaking its very foundations? Let's be honest, FIFA has never been shy about diving headfirst into geopolitical hotbeds. They've awarded World Cups to nations facing intense scrutiny over human rights. Qatar 2022, geopolitical tensions, Russia 2018, and social unrest, Brazil 2014, South Africa 2010. This isn't a new phenomenon. It's practically part of their DNA. FIFA sees itself as a force that can transcend borders, foster dialogue, and, of course, make a lot of money in the process. But here's the crucial distinction. Even when FIFA has chosen controversial hosts, there was often an underlying assumption of predictable state behavior. Russia, for all its political complexities, operated within a reasonably understood framework of international diplomacy, at least in the context of major sporting events. Qatar, while facing severe criticism, made clear commitments and adhered to a defined set of international engagements. There was a certain level of shall we say, operational stability that FIFA could rely on. FIFA's entire business model, its legitimacy, and its power stem from its ability to convene the world. It's an organization of 211 member associations, more than the United Nations. This means it has to cater to an incredibly diverse set of political views, cultural norms, and economic interests. To keep all these plates spinning, FIFA needs host nations that are seen as reliable, welcoming, and committed to facilitating a truly global event, regardless of the individual political beliefs of participating nations. They need governments that respect the sanctity of sports, that ensure fair access, and that won't suddenly throw a wrench in the works because of an unrelated diplomatic spat. They need host countries that are, above all, predictable in their international conduct. Now, imagine the globalist mandate colliding with a resurgence of America First foreign policy. A foreign policy that prioritizes unilateral action, that views international agreements with suspicion, and that often expresses skepticism about the very concept of global cooperation. This isn't just a difference in opinion, it's a fundamental clash of ideologies. Consider the practical implications for FIFA. How do you plan for visa requirements when a potential U.S. administration might implement travel bans based on nationality or origin, or dramatically increase scrutiny for specific regions? FIFA needs to assure its member associations that all their players, coaches, staff, and even fans will be able to enter the US, Mexico, and Canada without political interference. If a player from, say, Iran or Venezuela, nations that have historically had strained relations with the US, suddenly finds themselves denied entry due to new or reimposed restrictions, it creates a massive crisis for FIFA. It undermines their principle of universal participation. Then, there's the issue of trade and economic policy. FIFA relies heavily on international sponsors, broadcasting rights, and the free flow of goods and services required to stage such an event. If the U.S. were to engage in new or escalating trade wars, or impose tariffs on key goods and services, it could drive up costs, complicate logistics, and alienate crucial commercial partners. Imagine a major European sponsor facing steep tariffs to bring their equipment into the U.S. or having their advertising revenue impacted by retaliatory measures. This isn't just about money, it's about the financial viability and overall perception of the World Cup. Furthermore, a America First approach could lead to a less collaborative stance on security and intelligence sharing, which is absolutely vital for an event of this magnitude. Or it could complicate agreements with Mexico and Canada, making the trilateral hosting model, the very foundation of the bid, far more difficult to manage. The smooth operation of a World Cup requires a delicate diplomatic dance between all three host nations, and if one of them is constantly at odds with the others, or with the wider international community, that dance quickly devolves into a messy brawl. FIFA needs a host that is a stable, reliable anchor, not a geopolitical loose cannon. This isn't a hypothetical parlor game. It's about the literal mechanics of the World Cup. And if the host becomes a barrier instead of a bridge, what does that mean for the very athletes who are supposed to be the stars of the show? The players. They're the real collateral damage in this political crossfire. Can the world's best athletes even get into the USA to play in 2026, or will border policies become the ultimate referee, deciding who plays and who stays home? Let's zoom in on the most crucial element of any World Cup, the players. These aren't just athletes. They're ambassadors for their nations, often symbols of hope and unity in their home countries. For them, playing in a World Cup is the pinnacle of their careers, a dream cultivated since childhood. And for FIFA, ensuring every qualified nation can field its full, strongest team is paramount to the integrity and fairness of the tournament. Under a potential future Trump administration, we've got a roadmap. We've seen the playbook. Think back to the previous travel bans, often referred to as the Muslim ban, which restricted entry for citizens from several Muslim-majority countries. While those specific orders were later modified and eventually rescinded by the Biden administration, the precedent was set. The willingness to impose broad-brush travel restrictions based on nationality, often with limited exemptions, became a very real part of U.S. policy. Now, imagine the diversity of the 48 nations that will qualify for the 2026 World Cup. Players will hail from every corner of the globe: Europe, South America, Africa, Asia, the Middle East. Many of these nations could, under certain geopolitical circumstances, find themselves on a U.S. restricted list. We're not talking about a handful of obscure players here. We're talking about potentially star players, crucial team members, essential coaching staff, and even significant contingents of media and fans from entire nations. The process of obtaining visas for athletes and their entourages for a major international tournament is already complex. It requires meticulous planning, diplomatic cooperation, and swift processing. Countries like Brazil, Argentina, France, Germany, and England might face relatively few hurdles. But what about a team from a country with strained relations with the U.S., or one that might be targeted by new travel restrictions? Here's where the dream turns into a potential nightmare. Picture this scenario. A star striker from a North African nation, essential to his team's World Cup hopes, applies for his U.S. visa. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months. His application is stuck in administrative processing, flagged due to his country of origin or some arbitrary new policy. He misses crucial training camps. The team prepares without him, his mental state in tatters. Then, just days before the tournament, his visa is denied. Or maybe it's granted, but only after he misses the group stage. This isn't just about one player. It could be an entire coaching staff, a key medical team, or even a significant portion of a team's fan base. What if a nation like Iran, consistently qualifying for the World Cup, faces blanket travel restrictions? Or players from Venezuela, Cuba, or even China, depending on the evolving geopolitical landscape? A World Cup is supposed to be an inclusive event. The U.S. government, under an America First doctrine, might prioritize perceived national security or political leverage over the globalist ethos of FIFA. FIFA guarantees that all qualified teams will be able to participate. It's written into their agreements. But what happens when the host nation's immigration policy directly contradicts this guarantee? This puts FIFA in an impossible position. Do they challenge the U.S. government? Do they threaten to move games? Do they accept a World Cup where some nations are effectively barred from full participation? Any of these options would be a catastrophic blow to the tournament's legitimacy and global appeal. Moreover, the psychological impact on players and teams would be immense. The constant uncertainty, the fear of denial, the feeling that they are not truly welcome, would overshadow the joyous anticipation of competing on the world stage. It wouldn't just be about who can't get in. It would be about how unwelcome others might feel, even if they clear the hurdles. This isn't just a logistical problem. It's a profound question of fairness, respect, and the very spirit of international sportsmanship. A World Cup where some nations feel excluded before the first kick is a World Cup that has already lost its soul. This isn't merely about individual visa denials. It's about a potential systemic exclusion that could shatter the very promise of a global football festival. And when a host nation becomes actively unwelcoming, the world's footballing powers might not just grumble. They might take a stand. Could this push them to the brink of an unthinkable act, a boycott? Could a political leader's rhetoric or policy push the world's footballing nations to say, "No thanks, USA," leaving the 2026 World Cup a hollow shell of its former glory? History has a funny way of repeating itself, especially when politics and sports get tangled up. We've seen it before. major sporting events becoming battlegrounds for ideological clashes. Think about the Olympic boycotts of the Cold War era. In 1980, the U.S. led a boycott of the Moscow Olympics in protest of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. For years later, the Soviets retaliated by boycotting the Los Angeles Olympics. These weren't just symbolic gestures, they were massive diplomatic statements that severely impacted the integrity and legitimacy of those games. Star athletes missed their once-in-a-lifetime chance, and the world watched a deeply fractured competition. Now, apply that historical lens to 2026. FIFA, for all its desire to remain apolitical, is acutely aware of how quickly geopolitical currents can swamp its biggest events. They've had to navigate pressure from human rights groups, from environmental activists, and from various governments over controversial host selections. But a direct political confrontation with the host nation, especially the dominant partner in a three-country bid, is a whole different ballgame. Imagine a scenario where a renewed America First foreign policy leads to heightened tensions with key allies, renewed travel restrictions against certain nations, or aggressive rhetoric that alienates entire regions. Let's say a major footballing power like Germany or Brazil, deeply committed to multilateralism and human rights, finds itself profoundly uncomfortable with U.S. policies. Or perhaps several African nations feel targeted by visa restrictions, or Latin American countries are angered by rhetoric regarding immigration or trade. This isn't just about one country complaining. This is about the collective voice of FIFA's member associations. They are the stakeholders, the voters, the very foundation of the global game. They care deeply about their players, their fans, and their national dignity. If they perceive the U.S. as an unwelcoming host, or worse, a hostile one, they won't just sit idly by. The biggest struggle for FIFA would be maintaining legitimacy in the face of widespread discontent or, God forbid, actual threats of withdrawal. What if, say, a bloc of African nations collectively states that they cannot in good conscience send their teams to a country that implements discriminatory travel policies? Or if European nations express profound moral objections to certain U.S. actions, making their participation politically untenable at home? FIFA's nightmare scenario isn't just a handful of players being denied visas. It's entire teams, or even blocs of nations, deciding to boycott the World Cup. This would not be a soft walkout. It would be a catastrophic blow to the tournament's global standing, its commercial viability, and FIFA's own reputation as a unifying force. Sponsors would pull out. Broadcast partners would demand refunds. The spectacle would be irreparably tarnished. Even short of an outright boycott, the constant threat of political interference or the ongoing controversy would cast a long, ugly shadow over the entire event. Imagine press conferences dominated by questions about political policy instead of football tactics. Imagine protests outside stadiums, not just about local issues, but about international relations. The focus shifts from the beautiful game to ugly politics, leaving a bitter taste for everyone involved. The U.S., Canada, and Mexico bid on a promise of a unified, welcoming, and celebratory World Cup. A second Trump presidency, with its established America First blueprint, threatens to replace that promise with a landscape of division, hostility, and geopolitical friction. The very unity that won the bid could be fractured by policies that prioritize nationalistic isolation over global cooperation. The question isn't if these tensions would arise, but how severe they would become, and whether FIFA, the host nations, and the global football community could possibly navigate such an explosive minefield. The stakes couldn't be higher. The financial implications alone would be staggering, let alone the damage to America's global image. We peeled back the layers of how an America First doctrine could trigger a chain reaction, from unraveling the united bid to creating a visa nightmare for players and even sparking the specter of boycotts. Now, we're not just talking about political arguments anymore. We're talking about cold, hard cash, shattered dreams, and the kind of diplomatic tightrope walk that could make even the most seasoned diplomat sweat through their suit. Because if the political house starts shaking, everything else, the money, the infrastructure, the very soul of the tournament, comes crashing down with it. The World Cup promises billions for host cities. But if the political climate turns toxic, could that economic boom turn into a billion-dollar black hole, leaving taxpayers holding the bag? Let's talk money, honey. When a city bids for the World Cup, it's not just about bragging rights. It's about a projected economic tidal wave. We're talking billions of dollars in tourism revenue, job creation, infrastructure upgrades, and a massive boost to the local economy. For USA 2026, the projections were eye-popping. A 2018 report by the Boston Consulting Group predicted that the tournament could generate over $5 billion in short-term economic activity, create 40,000 jobs, and pump over $1 billion into local economies across the 11 U.S. host cities. Think about what those numbers mean for places like Kansas City, Atlanta, or Seattle. Hotels booked solid for weeks. Restaurants overflowing. Bars buzzing. Small businesses selling souvenirs, transportation services, local tours, all seeing an unprecedented surge in demand.